Now let's begin today's conversation in Nigeria, where prominent human rights lawyer Femi Falana has lauded the Minister of Interior's initiative to pay 500 million naira in fines for 4,000 prison inmates as a means to alleviate overcrowding in Nigeria's correctional facilities. Falana, while appreciating the minister's efforts, recommends that the allocated funds should be channeled towards enhancing the overall welfare of inmates and proposes seeking presidential and gubernatorial pardons for those inmates who lack the financial means to pay their fines, ensuring their swift release. He also advises the minister to collaborate with the Chief Justice of Nigeria and Chief Judges nationwide to utilize the legal authority in ordering the release of inmates held beyond their maximum sentencing period. This modified approach, combining financial allocation for inmate welfare and seeking clemency, could serve as a more effective means of addressing the overcrowding issue in Nigeria's correctional centers. Joining me this evening for this discussion is Dr. Uju Agomoh. She's the Executive Director, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action. She joins us live from Enugu. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Dr. Agomoh.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Now, Dr. Agomoh, could you kindly outline the historical factors that have contributed to the current state of overcrowding in Nigerian correctional facilities? Just how bad is this situation?
I think it is bad. It is bad. And basically, there are different aspects that are playing on this issue. You just spoke about the issue of overcrowding, for example. In dealing with the issue of overcrowding, there are two major things that we must always bear in mind. One is how do we control the rate of reception into places of custody? That means what determines who comes in. And the second is how do you control the duration in custody? But you can find out the fact that over the years, there have been almost like a continuous effort of not enabling holistic intervention to be adopted in terms of correctional reforms. And there have been different attempts, but because these attempts are not holistic, and also because even when there are legislative reforms to deal with these issues, there are no full implementation of all of that actions that have been encapsulated within the provisions of the law to make it work. So it is a problem of not addressing the issue holistically. It is also a problem of not fully appreciating that this process is a system. And when you talk about a system, it means that every step of the way, right from the point of arrest to the point of prosecution, to the point of trial, to the point where sentence is made, to the point of the person serving sentence, also to the point of the person being discharged back into the community. Because even at that point, when you have the person in the community, the necessary things needs to be done to ensure that reoffending is addressed.
So they don't return back to the correctional facilities. Now, Dr. Uju Agomoh, you're the Executive Director of Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action. Prominent human rights lawyer, Mr. Femi Falana, suggests reallocating the 500 million earmarked by the Interior Ministry for paying fines to inmates' welfare. Can you discuss the potential long-term benefits of this approach for the criminal justice system? He's saying that rather than, using this huge amount of money to pay the fines and just get them out of the system, it's better to direct this money towards prisoner welfare. What's your take on this, as somebody who's very familiar with the system?
I think the first thing to do is to understand who are the people who will find in custody. There are primarily three categories of persons in custody. The first are those persons who are completely innocent and have no business being in custody. The second are those who are committed some offenses, but those offenses are not offenses that require them to be in custody because these are minor offenses. And those who have option of fine fall into this. And truly, there is no reason why those people should be in custody, not even for one day. The third are those persons who, of course, have committed offenses. They need to be in custody, but because one day they are going to come out, we need to do what needs to be done to ensure that they are rehabilitated. So let's go back to the question that you asked, which is about how do we ensure a sustainable process in terms of those who are fined. So if you pay fine today and you don't have a way of ensuring that that tap is closed, you are going to have more people who you will need to pay fines for tomorrow. So the question therefore is that we need to think about a more holistic approach. How do we ensure that on no occasion should those people who do not desire to be in custody? I don't know whether you recall that before the last president left, that correctional service was placed on the concurrent legislative list. And part of what we have found that has enabled a lot of people who are being charged and fined, it has been because we saw that the people who are pushing them into custody because they didn't pay the fine are not the people who, or the arm of government that is feeding them. Because a lot of the people end up spending more time just for feeding than how much you had for those persons, even if those fines, or that have charged them for the issue of the fines. So the question therefore is, how do we make this thing work? So for one instance is, why can we make sure that we have an embargo that no one who is sentenced for fine should be in custody? Because even one day in custody can turn an innocent person and a less offender into a serious offender. So the society is getting more hot through that process. So why don't we have a process which enables those who are have sentenced for fine to be in a situation where they can work, be supported, so as they are working, those fines, they are paying back their fine, and they don't need to be in custody. So my concern is that whatever we do, we need to ensure that it's sustainable. But paying a fine one-off, as you know, they would require much more than that to be sustainable. So we need to also ensure that, and I think that once you get to a situation where you say to state governments, for example, you feed the inmates that are charged for state offenses, which is exactly what the issue of placing correctional service in the concurrent legislative list may boil down to. So you would understand that people won't be doing that. There are no custodial measures, for God's sake. There are community service. There are a lot of things that you can do in the community.
Avoid just sending people to prisons, to correctional facilities.
Yes,
now,
because when they're in custody.
Now, Dr. Agomoh, you mentioned something quite shocking. You said those that are completely innocent. How is it possible that in 2023, present-day Nigeria, you could have individuals that are completely innocent of any criminal offense in the system, in the correctional facilities? How did they end up here? And how does this miscarriage of justice happen?
No, different reasons and different ways. You know, we have a system whereby the whole notion of investigative policing is no longer there. And you have a situation where a lot of time people are not using forensic equipment to deter or determine or detect what had happened or to investigate what had happened. So you see a situation where suspects are pushed and beaten and tortured, and then they admit what they did not do. You see that happening. You see a situation where people are rounded up because offense have been committed, and before you know it, the innocent get to be processed through that process, and then you are down on the other side. So yes, the truth is that there are certain persons who are completely innocent who are in custody, and there's need to make sure that there is no reason why that should be the case. And usually there are things that are supposed to be done to ensure that oversight and checks and balances happen before you just send somebody to custody. And that's one thing that is happening. And we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing it. And again, as I said, even the other part where even people who have committed offenses, and some of those offenses, just take, for example, a lot of people who are given fines. Okay? Sometimes for environmental offenses, maybe they are hawking where they're not supposed to. You have not provided alternative for them, and then you arrest them and charge them for an amount which they can't pay. And when they can't pay that amount, you put them in custody, and then the government will begin to feed them with an amount more than what you have charged them with in those fines, and they get more corrupted, and they come out of the society, out of the custody, and become more hardened criminals. So again, we are not doing good to the nation. We're not doing
Yes.
good to ourselves. So we need to be a little bit more, what's the word I should use? A little bit more objective in our approach and a little
proactive
bit more
also,
comprehensive
and,
in terms of intervention.
and also to look at the bigger picture, like your agreement with Mr. Femi Falana that, look, you might pay this fine, it's a one-off, but there's an entire system that contributes to these people ending up in these correctional facilities in the first place. So you need to stop it from the root. Now, let's talk about the intricacies of seeking presidential and gubernatorial pardons for inmates on grounds in the past. I remember I visited Ikoyi prisons a few years ago. It was Lagos State Judiciary Week, and the Chief Judge of the state exercises his or her prerogative to release prisoners who have been of good behavior. These things happen, and I'm sure you're very familiar with it, Dr. Uju. How much of a decongestion does this do, the presidential and governors' pardons of inmates? And how does this process typically work in Nigeria? How many innocent people or those with minor offenses can you get out of the system? Because from what I heard, there's an overwhelming majority of prisoners in Nigeria are awaiting trial inmates.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, let me say, with respect to the earlier point we had dealt with, my point is not to get the people who are on fine out. We need to do that as much as possible, whatever support. But we need to have the holistic perspective and approach to this, so that we stop the tap, so that we don't get back again next week or next year to do the same thing again. Now, back to your question, I would want to explain that there are different measures to be able to decongest, to remove people from custody through what you may call administrative reviews, which is basically what these two processes require. So with awaiting trial persons, which you are completely correct, have the highest number of those who are in custody in that category. You have a process where the chief judge, through what is known as the jail delivery process, has a way of getting into custody and look at different criteria and is able to remove or rather release certain persons either conditionally or unconditionally. So that's one approach, so that somebody can get it. But those persons are those persons who have not been convicted. And there are different, things like those who maybe have overstayed longer time than they would have done if they were found guilty, all of those kind of stuff. Sometimes those who have been granted bail, but they have been there, they vary the bail. So that's one process. There is also another process that also applies to those who are not yet convicted, which is when the Attorney General of the state enters a nolle prosequi. Nolle prosequi in technical terms means that the Attorney General says, I'm no longer interested in proceeding with this prosecution. Therefore, the person is discharged. Now, to the question of prerogative of mercy, it is a constitutional process. So you have that both at the presidential or at the federal level and also at the state. I served in the presidential committee for about 4 years, and there are about 9 criteria that you look at. So part of that 9 criteria include things like those who are being convicted to death sentence, but then because of good behavior, whatever, you are reviewing and granting them life sentence, or those who are life, you're not asking them to be released, and so many other things. Then there is also the issue of the pardon that applies. Now, what normally happens is that there are the presidential prerogative of mercy. You look at the various criteria and you deal with those who have been charged with federal offenses and make those recommendations, and the recommendations are then presented to the president to sign. Whereas the opposite happens with those who are for state offenses, who are, will be most of the offenders. So for these ones, again, there are things like those who are there on terminal illness. There are things like those who are there because of old age. You have been recommended that you release them. There are those maybe because of the underage or for some reason because they're too young and other special circumstances. There are also those who are looking at it because of their being able to be of good behavior and all of that. And as I said, there are about 9 different things that you need to do. Ideally, you have those submissions. There is supposed to be a process of verification of the of the submissions that were made.
Yes.
So I recall instances in those days whereby once they give that, you go to the location and find out, okay, if they say this person is terminally ill, you want to see the inmate and be sure what kind of state it is, person is, and verify all of those things, age and all the rest of that. Now, so when you do that checks and balances, you are able to then make recommendations that can now be sent to the governor of the state to sign if it so agrees to the submission.
Okay.
Now, the question of how foolproof it is, it's a different matter, because unless you're able to have adequate processes of checks and balances, overseeing, making sure that, for example, they don't just send you list and you just sign.
Now, Dr. Agomoh, sorry to interrupt you. How long does this process take from the beginning, from the application of clemency to its approval? How long does it typically take?
There is actually no set rule regarding the duration. But what I have found that in practice, that a lot of time people do this as more like maybe around the time they're celebrating Christmas or around the time they're doing Independence Day, which is part of the issue. There was a part of your question where you asked how effective this is. In reality, the impact of these oversight processes has not really been felt well, because sometimes somebody goes in and you release maybe, and by the way, I want to say to you that for the prerogative of mercy, it only applies to those who are convicted, and there are not too many convicted ones. Whereas for the other one, it applies for those who are waiting, I have not been yet convicted. Now, the problem with this is that because you do it not that frequent, you find out that even if 10 people are released and the next week.
Hello, Dr. Agomoh, are you there? Okay, if you're just joining, this is the Conversation in News Central. Okay, go ahead, please. We can hear you. Now, Dr. Agomoh, because we're quickly running out of time, I would like us to pack in as many things as possible just before we begin to wrap up this conversation. We've had previous attempts, several attempts, and one at decongesting the correctional facilities in Nigeria. And what comes to my mind is the recent attempt under President Muhammad Buhari, looking at the 2020 COVID-19 decongestion efforts. What were the key outcomes of that exercise, its successes and shortcomings, and what lessons should we learn as a country from this initiative? How much progress did we make with that? Hello, Dr.
I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
I don't know whether you can hear me. I lost you in a bit. You were saying the key lessons from the decongestion effort. Is that what
yes, the previous decongestion effort under President Buhari, COVID-19, 2020 COVID decongestion effort. What were the key outcomes, successes, and shortcomings? And what lessons should we learn from that exercise and initiative?
Yeah, thank you very much. As I said, I think the major thing is that we must adopt an approach that enables sustainable processes. You don't do things ad hocly. So you look at what had worked and ensure that there are processes across the whole gamut of the justice system. So one other thing is that, so remember that it's holistic, so you're looking at how do you control the actions of the police so they don't do arbitrary arrests and detention? How do you ensure that prosecution is diligent? How do you ensure that, the trials are speedy? How do you ensure that when sentences are given, they're given adequately and both non-custodial and measures are also adequately utilized, and the rest of that? You go back to the extent of also ensuring that those who have served sentences, that it's also made in such a way that proper integration is happening so that you reduce your offending. But the other point is about what are the means. For example, during the COVID, there were a lot of things we introduced. We were able to start off an e-court system. For example, my organization, we were able to set up about 25 courts in Abia State. The question therefore, and the 3 correctional centers in the state, with the Office of the Attorney General and the rest of that. The question is that these things have to continue. You don't stop. So even though people have access to normal courts, but you can also use the virtual courts to continue those kind of levels of support. Okay, so the problem we have in Nigeria is that once we do something that works, it becomes ad hoc. My use of non-custodial measures. During COVID, for example, FCT Correctional Service was able to, supervise 25,000 persons on community service in the FCT. So we can't say
it can be done.
To be obsessed with.
It can be done. Yes.
It can. And it has to be holistic. We have to for everyone. And I think there is a silver line of opportunity. And this opportunity is opportunity coming now with the concurrent placing of correctional service in the concurrent legislative list. So the states would need to be taking a little bit more proactive. I must use this opportunity to plead. Can we be a little bit more holistic in our intervention? A whole of society's approach to correctional service, not piecemeal. It has to be whole of society's approach. And once we do that, I tell you, we'll be better off as a nation.
Thank you very much. On that note, Dr. Uju Agomoh, Executive Director of Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And from what we've discussed, the federal government needs to take a whole holistic approach to structural reforms that are needed to address systemic issues in Nigeria's correctional system. I do appreciate your insights and your contribution to the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.